was going to be Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. We got to get Amram and Jochebed in there first. So if you prepared the next one, you'll be prepared for next week. So, but that we'll be in Exodus chapter 1, lesson number 5. As we begin, I'd like to ask Brother Mark to lead us in a word of prayer. It's good to see people that hadn't been with us in a while been able to be with us, back with us. Seems like every time we get someone back, someone else is sick, but we need to continue to remember those that are on our prayer list that are sick, but be thankful for those that are mending and getting better. But it is good for us to be here. We're going to look at Exodus chapter 1 in just a moment. I want to go back to begin with to Genesis chapter 15. And this is one of the times that God kind of reemphasizes his promises to Abraham or to Abram, and talking about the promises to come. And he's talking about the land that's there, the land of Canaan that would be given to them. But in Genesis 15, beginning in verse 13, after that conversation back and forth, it says, "Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. So he says, there's going to be great descendants of yours, but they've got to go through a period of affliction, of terrible things happening for 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve, I will judge. Afterward, they shall come out with great possessions. And so he says, now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the fourth generation, they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." It's kind of interesting how God works everything out. There are people that are praying for rain, others that may have something going on, not, wanting it not to rain that particular day. We pray for different things. Some people are praying one direction, some another. Well, how does God work all that out? I mean, it's going to be according to his will, of course. But here, he's looking at the promises he's making to Abram. And he says, look, I've got to spend some time building them up into a great nation. It's going to take time. But ultimately, he said, I'm not just going to take an innocent people off of this land. He says, it's in the fourth generation, they're going to come back because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So God's looking at the Amorites, and they're going to reach a point that he said enough's enough, and he's going to take them off the land. Well, he's building Israel into a great nation. By the time they become a great nation, it's time to get rid of the Amorites and some of those other nations. And so God pushes them out of the land or destroys them and keeps his promise to Abram. A lot of things get involved in the promises God makes and the commitment he has to keeping them. But God can handle it. I mean, he's all powerful. But one of the things he did promise was that your descendants will be in bondage for 400 years, but then they'll come out. So you come over to Exodus chapter 1. Any comments on that part? Exodus chapter 1. And we take up with verse 1, and it begins, with the ones that came down to Egypt, each man with his household, and it lists, the 12 sons, the 12 tribes, really the 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. There were 70 people that came down. Joseph, it said, was already there. And so very quickly, verse 6, they all died. I mean, time passes on. Now, at that point, at the time that Joseph was down there, all his family came down, What was the feeling of the Egyptians toward Joseph and his family? How did they feel about Joseph to begin with? They was proud to have him? Okay. I mean, because of his interpretation of those dreams, God working through him, and the plan they set in motion during the years of plenty to store up all that grain, they were able to make it through the 7 years of famine. You know, if they had not known the famine was coming, they would have just enjoyed the abundance and used it all up and not saved it. But because of God working through Joseph, they were all saved. And so they honored him, they respected him, and they grew into a great nation. And God had given them, Pharaoh offered to them that good land, that fertile land that was given to them. Verse 7 says the children of Israel were fruitful, increased abundantly, multiplied, and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So, and then our lesson text picks up. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So quite some time had passed, and how could a king come along and not know Joseph? I mean, I know time had passed, but do you suppose they had history? Do you suppose they had records that kept up?
People in this country that are 23 years old and don't know who Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Okay, I was going to bring that up. I saw something the other day that said in I forgot what state it is, their class books don't even mention George Washington anymore. And it lists some of the really important people in our history that have been erased out of it and tried to do it more from a politically correct kind of thing. Okay. I mean, if you think about, well, like you're talking about the way Satan's at work and everything, but you look at history. What do we say? If history repeats itself, and that we need to learn history so it does not. And even sometimes when we know it, we can go down the same path time and again. But we see it in our country where we're not really remembering history. I've seen these reporters that get out on the street and ask, like you're talking about 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, some history questions, just simple things would think. And they can't answer them. I mean, they don't know. You ask who this person is or that person is, and they have no clue. And even in more modern history, they don't know. And the sad part about that is that we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again if we don't understand where we came from and learn from it. And we can do that spiritually. I used to watch, I don't really watch many game shows anymore, but that was a lot of what was on TV growing up. And you'd watch these game shows, and people couldn't answer, who built the ark? And who built the ark in the Bible? And people might say Moses, was it Adam? They had no idea. It was Noah, and it's just very basic not knowing. And God said, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And so here, this literally, they're trying to destroy God's people because they didn't have the knowledge of who they really were and what they had done for them. And it's really sad to look at how they had done nothing wrong in and of themselves, but now Pharaoh rises up, doesn't know who he is, doesn't respect that at all. And in fact, he looks at it from we got to get rid of them before they do anything to us. Any thoughts? And so he said, he didn't know Joseph. He didn't know the history. He didn't have any respect for the people. All he saw was, here's people that are not Egyptians that are living here. And he said, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we are. And he just, I don't know if literally they were more or mightier. Probably in the area they lived, they were for sure. That area of the country they lived in, they were for sure. But whatever the case, he looked at them as a threat, just saying, look, if they really thought about it and were determined to, they could overtake us. Back in the Grecian Empire, in the first century, I should say, not the Grecian, the Romans, and even back in Grecian times, they said there were so many slaves that were there that really the slaves outnumbered the free man. But as far as him organizing and doing anything, they didn't do it. But here's a leader looking at it saying, we have a danger among us. And he said, we've got to take care of this problem. We got to deal shrewdly with them. We got to use a little thinking here, a little wisdom. We've got to take care of them because they're growing. Look how much they have grown, and they're growing more. And when they multiply, he said, if they don't do something themselves, if an enemy comes in and attacks Egypt, he said, what's going to happen? They'll take the enemy's side, and they'll be able to help the enemy to overtake us. They'll turn against us. And so he said, and be able to get out of the land. So at that point, they're taken really into slavery at that point. He set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. So he puts them to work, puts them into to slavery. So you go from somebody that's way up here and esteemed down here to slavery. Times can change, situations can change. And so, but he's trying to get them under control. But what happened? Did that work? No, it didn't, did it? It says, the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. And so, you live in fear, and what's that? A coward can die 1,000 deaths. We worry about what might happen, and they're there saying, "What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen?" Well, it's going to happen, and the more they try to push them down, the stronger they grow, and the more they grow. And so then it says that they made the children of Israel serve with rigor. In verse 13, does anybody have a different word for rigor? Verse 13, made them serve with rigor. Yeah, harshness. Yeah, rigorously. What does that mean? Harshly, hard work. It wasn't easy. You might be a servant to someone, and and you don't have your freedom, that's for sure. But you may have more of a cushy type job that's not really that hard to do and difficult. You may serve an important. You may be the person that tastes the king's drink or eats a bite of the king's food before he eats it, so that if it's poison, you die instead of the king. And that's a life and death situation. But how hard of work is it to take a drink of something or to take a bite of something? Yeah. Right. Or too tired. Too tired. Yeah. Yeah. It's get into them the attitude that we're not as good as you, or we can't, you're more powerful than me. And then also wear them out to the point that they don't feel like uprising. You just got to get rest for the next day. They served, it was bad enough to be a slave, but this was hard work, hard manual labor, to say the least. It mentions the things. They made their lives bitter with hard bondage. And so nothing about that sounds good, does it? They were treated very harshly. They didn't have, they became really bitter, I guess, at one point, because it's hard bondage. They had to work in mortar, in brick, in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. Any job they had, whatever it was out in the field, whether it's the brickwork or whatever, it was tough. It was hard. And they made it even harder on them, I think is a picture that it gives. And so he's trying to beat them back, beat them down, keep them from having more children. But the more they did that, the more the stronger they grew. If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And so they're becoming a strong people. Now, when they came out of Egypt, they weren't skilled in warfare, but they were hard-working people. They were used to hard bondage, so that had that going for them. But so the king's looking at it and says, this is not working. They're still growing. And so they had Hebrew midwives that helped deliver the children. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on their birth stools, so here's the woman in labor about to give birth. If it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. So he's trying to get rid of the danger there. Of course, if you wipe out all the males, you won't have children coming along. Plus, they were the ones that would rise up in warfare and be more dangerous. And so he's trying to wipe out the boys and to get them under control that way. So what did the midwives do? They didn't do what he said, did they? They feared God. And so, you know, as long as they've been in bondage, there's still that relationship with God. And I mean, you know, probably not perfect in all those things, but enough that they feared their God, the true God, rather than the Pharaoh of Egypt and the Egyptian false gods. And they didn't do as the king of Egypt commanded them. They're taking their life in their own hands. They saved the male children alive. And that's the way we would feel. I mean, we look at things like abortion today and the push for people to have abortions. And they were praising some new clinic, I forgot where it was, that opened up that specializes in third trimester abortions. And I thought, you know, any of them's bad, but that kind of brings it to light. But here he's saying, you kill them. When they're born, just kill them. You know, you cast them in the river to, you know, take their lives. But so the king of Egypt, but they saved the males alive. And the king, of course, he notices that, and he calls for them and says, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? The midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come. Now, do you think they were telling the truth? Probably not. Sometimes. Yeah. I mean, it's possible that God allow that to happen and cause that to happen, you know, so that they could be born. But also, it says they saved the male children alive. And so if they got there and they were born, they didn't put them out to die, expose them, and let them die like they were basically told to do. So they may not have told the truth there. But the point is, God is preserving his people in this, and God dwelt well with the midwives. And so God protected them, and the people multiplied and grew very mightily. So that plan just didn't work out like Pharaoh thought it was. God is with his people, and if God is with you, it's going to work out. And so any thought? What, meant to have Moses? Yes. I mean, he had a purpose in mind for Moses, and you will see that play out because, again, it's getting close to the clock is ticking. That's going to be in bondage for 400 years. And then in chapter 2, Moses is born. So that clock's ticking, what is it, around 300, a little over 300 years at that point, because he's going to be 80 when he comes back and God through him leads the children of Israel out. So, I mean, you know, it's getting close to time. God had not forgotten his people. He still got them in mind. In chapter 2, you have a man of the house of Levi who took as wife a daughter of Levi, and the woman conceived, bore a son, and so you have, you know, what, Amram and Jochebed, you know, they had 3 children, and we'll see more about the siblings in next week's lesson, really all 3 of them, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. We'll talk about them next week. But she gets pregnant and has this child, this son, during this time that they were supposed to be killing the male children. And so here you are, a godly woman, have this child, and you realize it's a boy, and this child's supposed to be put to death. What would you do? Well, I know what we'd hope we'd do, and that's save the child alive. It's kind of interesting the way it puts it. The woman conceived, bore a son. When she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. What if he had been an ugly child? Would she have hid him for 3 months? That had never been no ugly baby. Okay. Yeah, you gave a good answer there. So I think I mentioned this in class. I don't know. I worked with a minister one time, and he just told me one time. He said, he said, I've never seen a pretty baby. Just all babies to him are ugly. I mean, he just said they come out all crinkled and wrinkled and head. Anyway, he just didn't. And so he goes, what I do when I go to the hospital is I say, oh, what a baby, you know. And that way, I'm not saying he's beautiful or ugly. I'm just saying, what a baby. Well, some of the ladies caught on to that, and we had about 10 or 15 babies born over a year or 2 period with the young couples there, and they would snarl at him, and he said, oh, what a baby, you know. And finally he caught on to, they knew what he meant by that. But I'm like you, I think all little babies are beautiful. and wonderful, and it's just that wonderful new life that comes into the world. But in the sense, I mean, evidently, he was a beautiful child. I mean, above and beyond what we think of, oh, that's a pretty baby. I mean, just a beautiful baby. Do you think if he wasn't so beautiful, she would have still hit him? I believe so. I mean, if she was going to risk her life for that child, but maybe in that beautiful, I think there be more things involved in that than just the beauty. Here he was a she was blessed with a healthy child, a beautiful child, and maybe she looked at that, I think, from a godly point of view of God's hand is upon this child, or and God did have special things in mind, but
Looks didn't appear, did not make a difference to God. He sent his own son in a plain description. He didn't stand out.
Right.
He was there.
yeah, oh yeah,
Here it says this man was beautiful.
right. And it may just be stating the facts. It was a pretty baby, just a beautiful baby. Yeah, like you say with Jesus, he looked so much like just a average person back then that some people had a hard time accepting who he was, and especially with him being a carpenter's son, as they would look at it, even though he's the son of God. Nothing wrong with that, but they would look down upon that and say, this is not a person that's a great leader or whatever. But with Moses, he was a beautiful child, but she did her best to hide him for 3 months. How easy would it be to hide a baby? Especially now we might could have a little bit more advantage on something like that, but you look at it as being in a slave family where everything's monitored, everything's watched, and you don't have the huge houses that a lot of people have today, and you're trying to hide your child. One commentator I read said your clothesline would give away your secret if nothing else did, with those, whatever they used for diapers or whatever else. But the point is, it's hard to hide a child, especially when the child's not fed right when it wants to, or doesn't feel too good, or doesn't get his way. Some baby's lungs are pretty loud, and you could hear that crying. But she did everything she could to keep him alive, to hide him. But she got to a point she could no longer hide him. Maybe she had some close calls. Perhaps, people are beginning to ask questions. And those close to them may not have turned them in, but you never know who you can trust and who you can't. In fact, the Hebrew writer look over at Hebrews chapter 11, mentions this part of it. He mentions several things here. Hebrews 11, and let's go down to verse 23. Hebrews 11:23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith, they hid him. So they knew that God would not want them to kill their child, and they did what they could to save his life. But they hid him for 3 months by faith. And then by faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And we'll see more about that next week. But you look at them, and they realized they were taking their lives into their own hand, risking their lives, because if they were caught keeping that child, Pharaoh could say, oh, just kill them. Go ahead and kill the family. They disobeyed me, and if they'll do that, what else will they do? But they did what they could. So what do you do when you can't hide the baby anymore? And it's going to be obvious that he was born during this time that you weren't supposed to keep the male children alive. So she took an ark of bulrushes. There are a lot of bulrushes around the reeds that were there along the river. And she made a little ark out of it, not like we think of the Noah's Ark, but just a little boat, a little basket type thing that would float, and dabbed it. I think, what's it saying? King James, I think it says slime. I can't remember what it said, but it's asphalt and pitch is what the New King James says. Something that would seal it and make it waterproof where it would float. And so she put the child in it and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. So she puts it in a place that it won't float away. The reeds are kind of holding it in place, and she puts it there by the river's bank. And you can't help but think that she knew what was going to happen, that she knew a little bit about Pharaoh's daughters, for instance, the princesses, and what their bathing routine was. I mean, they looked at the Nile River as, that it blessed them, and they worshiped the Nile, and to go and bathe in it would be something that would have probably some spiritual implications to them, as well as just getting clean. But so one commentator went so far as to say that evidently Jochebed worked in Pharaoh's household in some shape, form, or fashion. Nothing in the scripture says that. I mean, but know that location. Well, I think many people would know that location. I mean, you know, it may not have been such a secret. So I think you can try to sneak too many things in there and try to figure it out. But whatever the case may be, she sent Moses' sister down to watch from a distance and to see what's going to happen. Let's go put Moses down in that basket. Let's see what happens. That shows they didn't just put him out there to expose him to the elements because he is in a basket that was waterproof, or to let, you know, crocodile or whatever else eat him. No, they're watching him, making sure he's okay, and they know, I think, where Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe. So the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the river. Her maidens walked along the riverside. So while she's bathing, they're kind of just looking around and walking around. And she saw the ark among the reeds. She sent her maid to get it. So the princess, she saw, what's that over there? What's that ark? Go get it and let's see what's in it. When she opened it, they saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. And so, you know, it'd be obvious that it was a Hebrew, not one of the Egyptians. You know, he would have been circumcised on the 8th day. And anyway, even though she saw, hey, this is a child, this is a Hebrew child, it's not an Egyptian, you know, she had that tender heart where her father had not had a tender heart. You know, she had a little bit of compassion, a motherly type of love there that you would see, that even if it's someone else's child, I mean, here's a child crying and upset, and she had compassion on it. And she goes, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then here Miriam steps in and shows herself and says to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women that she may nurse the child for you? You see God's hand working in all of this. I mean, here it is that he's taken in, he's saved because Pharaoh's daughter's taken him, but who's going to be a nursemaid to him? His own mother. And so Pharaoh's daughter said, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I'll give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And well, I forgot verse 8. Said, go. So the maiden went and called the child's mother. I mean, she got their mother to come. And you see God's hand at work in that, you know, here, you go, you raise your child. You don't have to worry about your child being put to death anymore. And not only that, I'll pay you to raise your own child. So just kind of an interesting turn of events, to say the least. I mean, God's hand involved in that. Now, the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. So on the one hand, you know, he was raised by his mother to a certain period of time, you know, till he was weaned. But she had opportunities to talk to him, to instill in him those principles of those principles of God and who God is, of being a person of, you know, a man of God. And so those stuck with him. You know, never underestimate the power of a mother, as far as even in a small child. You know, you can sing to your child, talk to your child, the Bible stories that you tell, and all that had been instilled in his heart. So later, when he had a choice to make, he made the right choice. But to have all the privileges that he did within Pharaoh's house, I mean, they weren't as cultured as we are or can be today. Didn't have as much knowledge as we do, but still, they had a tremendous amount of knowledge. And he had all the prestige that he would have wanted. He could have just said, forget the people of God. But again, as we see in next week's lesson, he did not. Any thoughts? In Hebrews chapter 11, we read a moment ago, when he was born, he was hid 3 months by his parents because they saw he was beautiful, a beautiful child. They were not afraid of the king's command. You know, whatever will be, we're going to save our child if we can. And then when he became of age, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. What kind of pleasures would Moses have had if he had chosen just to be Pharaoh's son? What would have been there for him? Yeah, probably anything he wanted. I mean, as long as you didn't upset Pharaoh, you could get pretty much whatever you wanted. Any other thoughts? I mean, you're in, you think about being royalty, not just where it's figuratively like it is in some places today, but to truly be part of royalty, a royal family, the one that had all the power, the prestige, had everything, anything they wanted. To be able to have that, I mean, you can see it's the pleasures of sin, the pleasures of sin for a season, or the passing pleasures of sin, but that doesn't get you into heaven, does it? But then it says he chose to suffer affliction with the people of God. What was so good about the affliction of the people of God? Why would he choose that? I mean, because his mother raised him a Hebrew. Yeah, I mean, his mother raised him right. She instilled some principles in there. He knew where he came from. And so, and he knew his ancestry and knew about God. And he made a choice. I mean, he said, look, I can go out here and live like the Egyptians and enjoy that. But isn't it better to worship and serve the true God? And I may suffer with him for a while, but there's eternal blessings there. And one thing to think about too, was Moses, did he always make the right decisions at the right time? Was he perfect? No. What are some times you can think of that maybe he tried to take things into his own hands a little bit too much? Yeah, I mean, when the Lord appeared to him, he wasn't gung ho and going back. Oh, you talking about where at now? With the burning bush? Okay, make sure I heard the right one there. Yeah, I mean, he needed some nudging, needed some pushing, some convincing. He was hesitant to go back down there because and I don't, you watch some of these old movies like the Ten Commandments and all, and it looks like he ran out of Egypt and then came right back, still the strapping young man or whatever. I mean, now he was still in good health and hadn't lost any of his abilities, but he was 40 years old when he left Egypt. Another 40 years passed. He was 80 years old when he came back. There's a little bit of difference between 40 and 80, is concerned. But still, he was concerned, where one Pharaoh had forgotten Joseph and who he was. 40 years, he might think, that's maybe not be long enough for them to forget me, and that he had killed the Egyptian down there. Plus, you look at it when he killed the Egyptian, some will try to say he was trying to start the uprising a little sooner than he thought. I don't know. I mean, he thought he could hide it, what he did. He just was beginning to make choices there as far as trying to care about the people of God rather than the Egyptians. Any other thought on times that he fell short? Yeah. I mean, when he disobeyed God, he disobeyed God and struck the rock instead of just speaking to it, and he really trying to bring attention, I think, to himself and look what we've done, look what I can do, rather than giving the glory to God. But how's that?
He had a spontaneous burst of anger and lost control. I don't think he was trying to show off.
I mean, in the sense of he was just so frustrated with the people and so angry with them, and just says, "Look, I'm going to, and whatever. He didn't give God the glory, maybe in that moment of anger or upset. And again, we can do a lot of things that don't bring glory to God when we get angry and upset. But sometimes we need to take a breath, and we can criticize him for that. But how many times have we done that? We have to be careful. We have to really, really be careful in what we do. He should have thought of, I've got to do what God said, and just ignore the comments that are being made. But he fell short at times, and yet nothing said that he lost out on his eternal reward, because later you see him and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus talking, and I don't think he was brought out of torment to come back or whatever. I don't think that would be the picture at all. But he missed out on the promised land here on earth, but not the eternal. But anyway, the point being, he still was being prepared for the work that was lying ahead for him. And God had a special plan in mind for him as far as what he would do. But you do see a godly mother and evidently a godly father as well that allowed Moses to stay alive. But especially we see that in his mother, who did everything she could to preserve his life, and then to being willing to give up her son, not by killing him, but to turn him over to hopefully Pharaoh's daughter to raise. And then God blessed her by allowing her to come back and be the nursemaid to him and get to instill those principles in him. You see God's hand throughout it all. On page 51, on applications, from our perspective, it's easy to see the hand of God at work in the salvation of baby Moses. He was born and hidden from Pharaoh, saved by being cast into the Nile River, found by Pharaoh's daughter, nursed and reared by his own mother. To attribute these events to chance is nonsensical. God remained in control all along. Through his providence, Moses was protected and prepared to deliver Israel. If anything, we need to be reminded of God's continued care for his children. You know, God can work really directly. We see that in the plagues, but we can see him working behind the scenes as well in this situation. We can see acknowledge the important role of Amram and Jochebed played in the process. They were willing to obey God, teach their son to do the same thing. And of course, we as parents need to do the same thing today. And then on the next page, Moses' ability to live as if seeing him who is invisible is significant. He did not learn this in the palace of Egypt. His loving, faithful mother taught him this. Individuals often live one way when being watched and another way when they think no one is looking. God, however, is always aware of our actions. We should follow Moses' example and walk by faith. And we should do what we can teach our children do what we can to teach our children this very important lesson. I mean, Moses could say, well, you know, I know where I was born. I know who my parents were. But look where I am now. I'm in Pharaoh's household. I can live my life like I want to. But look at those principles that were instilled in his heart, that whether I'm in Pharaoh's palace or whether I'm out with the slaves in Egypt of Israel, I've got to be faithful to God. And I think he understood, I know he understood that through faith he could see him who's invisible, but the one who is invisible could see him as well. And so he put his faith and trust in God, and God used him. He blessed Israel through him and blessed Moses as well in his life. Any other thoughts? I'm trying to hold back a little bit and not get into Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. And you have in there, we'll look at that next week for real this time. But, you know, 3 siblings that work together in a lot of ways, but you have some sibling rivalry, some jealousies there as well that rise up. And so that had to be handled. And it wasn't so much about the sibling rivalry as it was, we'll see in that story, that is a lack of respect for God. God had chosen Moses, and Miriam and Aaron needed to understand that. Were they important in the work of God? Sure. But they needed to look at the way God has set things up and respect that. Any closing thoughts? Next week, we'll take up with lesson 6.